Today we're going to learn about a war that broke out between Native Americans and English colonists in New England in 1675. This is a map of New England. Right here where this blue circle is, that's where New England is. This is what the United States looked like back before it was the United States. So you can see there's lots of different Native American tribes written all over it. If you look very closely, you can see dotted lines that show where all the state lines are now, but back then those states did not exist yet. These are the indigenous nations of the region in New England. Long before the English settled present-day New England, Algonquian peoples lived in this region. One of these Algonquian nations was the Wampanoag. Their society was built around family relations. Both men and women could serve as their leader, called a sachem, who governed their nation along with counselors, elders, and lower sachems. In the early 17th century, the Wampanoag lived in present-day Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts. Wampanoags came into contact with European merchants at this time. English settlers in New England. When the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, the Wampanoag taught the Pilgrims how to fish and grow crops. Epidemics from diseases brought by Europeans, land seizures by settlers, and fighting among the colonists caused the deaths of many Native Americans in New England. From 1600 to 1675, so about 75 years, the region's Native American population decreased from about 140,000 to 10,000. So that's a huge drop. That's 130,000 people died in 75 years. That's a lot. During this same time period, the English population grew to 50,000. So when the English population first started, they were way outnumbered by the Native Americans. But then after about 75 years, now the English way outnumber the Native Americans by about 5 to 1. When before it was like thousands to 1. So that's a huge difference in just a short amount of time. 75 years may not seem like a short amount of time, but when we're talking about all of history, 75 years is a very short amount of time. So after a war between the English colonists and the Pequot in 1636 and 1637, it lasted a little more than a year, New England was free of major armed conflict for about 40 years. And in 1645, New England Puritans launched a campaign to convert the Native Americans to Christianity. About 2,000 Native Americans lived in praying towns where missionaries pressured them to give up their cultures and become Christians. So they were basically just saying, we don't really respect your religion. We want you to change your religion to our religion. And they were trying to convert them or change them into something else. Sachem Metacomet, who the English called King Philip. So this was him. Obviously, this is not a photograph. This is an illustration or a drawing. He was the sachem of the Metacomet, a tribe of the Wampanoag Nation, and in 1675 he forged a military alliance with about 2/3 of the region's Native Americans. So he was a very prominent leader of that time among the Native Americans. A lot of the Native Americans really respected him and listened to what he had to say. He was pretty well known among the Native Americans and the English because they all knew who he was because he was such a great leader. In June of 1675, Metacomet led an attack on the English settlement of Swansea, Massachusetts. And then over the next year, Native Americans attacked more than half of New England's towns and destroyed 12 out of 90, killing 5% of New England colonists. Native American casualties in the New England were higher, perhaps maybe 40% were killed by colonists or forced to flee as a result of colonial attacks. The English called this conflict King Philip's War, because remember, they called Metacomet King Philip. They didn't call him by his Native American name. They called him King Philip, even though he didn't refer to himself as a king, and he didn't call himself Philip, and none of the Native Americans called him that. They basically just gave him a new name. And then in August of 1676, colonial forces killed Metacomet and then mutilated his body and publicly displayed it. So Native American defenses basically just collapsed. The colonists sold many surviving Native American men into slavery in the West Indies and enslaved many women and children in New England. Colonists sent a smaller number of Native Americans to praying towns. So, we talk a lot about slavery with people coming from Africa, but we also had slavery with Native Americans as well. So, a lot of these Native Americans, after they lost in King Philip's War, were forced into slavery. So, you're going to read 3 historical documents today. And then while you're reading these documents, you're going to be thinking about what caused King Philip's War to begin with. Okay, so that's what your question for today is what caused this war to even get started?